Welcome to this episode of Displacer Geeks. My name is Brian.
And I'm Hudson. We're two geeks talking about the geek. And Brian, are we DMing today? Did I miss the memo?
You did miss the memo. Today we are going to talk about DM tips. Now, all these
Woo!
tips are going to be for any type of tabletop role-playing game that you play, okay? So we might reference Shadowrun or D&D or something like that, but as a DM, remember, it's all really the same. So just the rules are slightly different, or, well, actually quite a bit different, but but all the
Right.
tips work for anybody. So, Hudson, what would be a tip right off the top of your head that you think is very important?
Prepare for the adventure at a level that you feel comfortable with.
That's a
Right.
good one.
All right. Some people will tell you need to have like all this other stuff. Some people will tell you just to have like three bullet points. Listen, find your comfort zone because you need to be comfortable when you're running this game so it runs smoother. Find out what works for you and then do that.
I would 100% agree to that. One of the things that comes off the top of my head is fun first, okay? Make sure you're trying to have fun and make sure your players are having fun. And you will have to make adjustments. Hopefully that doesn't stress you out, but the adjustments can be very simple. But yeah, make sure you figure out the group if you need to prepare a lot or if you don't need to, because we're gonna give you a secret. You usually don't need to prepare a lot. So go with the flow and let the characters dictate a lot, and you'll actually probably have a lot of fun, would be my guess. What do you
Yep.
think on that?
Oh, no, that seems like a good idea too.
Yeah.
Another tip is the games have rules for a reason, right? So if the players are trying to use something like a spell, I don't want to say it in an abusive way, but maybe beyond the scope of the spell, set a clear and defined boundary and say like, hey, no, this is how this thing's supposed to work. What you're really trying to do sounds more like this type of action or this type of thing. Maybe you should try that instead.
Yeah, because you will have players that will either intentionally, which is the worst, but unintentionally use a spell or ability a little too powerful or other than what it really should be. So just talk with them, and as a DM, you can adjust it however you want. I mean, if you want to make it work that way, go for it. But if you feel like it's just kind of crossing the line of like, well, that's a little too much or whatever, then you
Yep.
just tell them that, and they should be cool with that. So yeah, that's a very good tip too. The first thing I wrote down on this little sheet of paper is you will make mistakes as a DM. Don't worry about it. Nobody cares. Nobody cares at all. In fact, the players will make mistakes too. Nobody should care. If at the end of a session you go, oh, I forgot that this thing had this ability and it was supposed to negate that. Oh well,
Oh
you've already
well.
played,
Yeah.
move on. It just doesn't matter. Oh, I forgot my second attack the entire game. Oh well.
Oh well.
Yeah, it's not a big deal. So and hopefully your players will know that as a DM you will make mistakes too. So if you have players
Sure.
that are giving you a hard time about making a mistake, well, maybe you need to find new friends or something. I don't know. What else you
Yeah.
think?
I would say make sure setting as a DM, being very clear and upfront about like rules and boundaries. Like you can be strict, but as long as you're upfront about it and like, hey, this is what I expect. This is what the rule says. This is how I want to play it. And you're upfront about it. So kind of like a communication like thing.
Yeah, open communication is really good. Let me build upon that. So when you're starting a campaign, get your players in, talk to them, give them ideas of what you want the campaign to be. If it's just going to be like, hey, this is going to be like classic fantasy, or hey, this is going to be like post-apocalyptic fantasy. Everything's gonna be really gritty. Or hey, this is gonna be super silly ridiculousness. And then the players can kind of figure out what they want to do for characters based on that. And then like Hudson's saying, if you do have certain boundaries or certain expectations on, hey, we're gonna do this, this, and this, we're not gonna do this, this, or this, then that open communication should make it so you don't run into many issues at all. And I mean, to be honest, I have never really ran into many major issues throughout my
No.
years of playing, but it's definitely nice to get it out there. Work with the players, and you'll find that there's a lot of benefit to that.
Yep.
Speaking of working with players, one thing I would recommend too is actually, I find it kind of fun too, is to check in with players outside of the session. So you
Hmm.
get done with your session, let's say you play on Wednesday nights, maybe throughout the week, you just reach out to your buddy and say, "Hey, what'd you think of last week? Are you happy with where you're at with your character? Is there anything that you want to see?" And they will give you feedback. And then that'll actually help you figure out what to do for your next session too, or maybe even help you figure out on how to like get to the end story for that character too.
Right.
So that's another little tidbit I would recommend.
One tip I received, I've never had an opportunity to try it out yet, though. It was everything's a bear. So if you need a random monster in a hurry, just use a bear and just reskin it to what you need it to be. You
There you
know?
go. Actually, I mean, I'm glad you brought up the reskinning thing. You can reskin any monster too. So
Yeah.
if you have players that know the game extremely well and they're always trying to like meta game and be like, "Oh, that thing's weakness is this. Oh, that thing has 35 hit points." That I would just reskin a different creature or something like that so they don't know. That's what I kind of like to do anyways, because I like it when players don't quite know and they're on their toes a little bit. But yeah, make a bear. Make it a bear.
Make it a bear.
I guess.
But you can just take, say it's a bear, right? And you're like running around out in the woods and you run into it and like they run into like a random encounter, but you don't have that prepared. You just pull those bear stats and say it's a velociraptor. They ain't gonna know.
Yeah, exactly. And then just make sure you let it fly. Or no, I'm thinking of pterodactyl. Never got my dinosaurs mixed
Yeah,
up.
but like you could tweak it just enough too. Like let's say it's like some
Yeah,
sort of like baby dragon. Okay, it has a bite attack and then it has this many hit points. Oh, I need to give it a breath weapon.
yeah,
Like,
easily.
okay, done.
Yeah. Make adjustments like crazy that
Yeah.
are more beneficial to the fun factor of it or the flow factor of it. So if you find yourself in combat and you find like it's going super slow, as sometimes like D&D does, cut your creature's hit points in half. You don't have to tell the players, just cut the hit
Hmm.
points in half. Lower the AC of something they haven't hit yet. If they keep swinging and you're like, man, they have not hit this thing, I'll make it one less or whatever. Any little adjustments you want. If you're
Yep.
thinking of like creatures that you want to put into the game or you see one in D&D and you think this is super cool. Boy, I wish it had this though, or I wish it did this. Just make it do it because it's fun and it's fantasy and it's creative. And if you want your dragon to breathe ice and fire, have it breathe ice and fire. It just doesn't matter. It's all for
Yeah.
the cool fun factor. The DM has full control,
Full control.
but be careful about your control. Because my other tip right now is going to be don't be the GM that says no to everything because that will piss off your players very quick. It'll just kind of be the Debbie Downer of the game session all the time.
Hmm.
So, and what I mean by that, you don't have to tell your players they can do anything they want. So, but if you are constantly saying, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. It actually stunts any growth in the story or fun. And again, they'll start to kind of get irritated at you because it's a natural thing to get a little irritated when people just keep telling you no, 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 no. So don't say no to an
You
extent.
know, yeah. Like even if it's like a knowledge check and it's about something they're not supposed to, if they roll really well, just give them like two sentences on it.
Yeah,
Like
give
it
them.
doesn't have to, don't give them a lot. Just give them just a little taste.
Yeah, and what that does is it gives them excitement. Like, oh, I'm not supposed to know anything about this, but I rolled so high that I got this little tidbit of knowledge. So let's just say, oh, you hear that creature originates from the north. Well, now all of a sudden, instead of just not knowing anything and being like, yeah, we don't know anything about it, now they're like, ooh, if we go north, we might run into that creature, according to what we figured out. That's pretty
Yeah.
cool. That's fun. There's an improv rule called listen and add to, and I can't tell you enough about how good that is for role playing too, because role playing is a lot of improv. You're just making a story together. And the way listening and add to works is Hudson comes out and says, I want to do X. And instead of me saying, well, yeah, I don't know. No, you can't really do X. You go, awesome, you do X. And then you just add to it, right?
Hmm.
That's not the best example in the world. What would be another good example here? Here's a great example. I had a character that avoided combat like the plague. never wanted to be in combat, no matter even if it messed up the players. And we ran into three boss types, and there's only three of us players. And when it got to my turn, and they're pretty creepy too. They're like rat things, like were rat type things. When it got to me, my very first turn, I just cast feign death and I tried to act like I was dead and I didn't help the group. And what the DM did, instead of first off being like, "Oh, you shouldn't do that. Oh, hey, don't do that, whatever," he just adjusted. So the great thing is when it got to the bad guys' turns again, he let them be kind of like stunned for a round. They were too busy looking at each other going, what just happened? And it was very funny. But that's a perfect example of listening and adding to instead of just no, 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 no. But and it could be for combat, it could be for role playing, anything like that. Another thing that I would say is pretty good is when you first start playing, remember it's a collaborative thing, so work with your players. But what I would suggest, and this is like any tabletop game, like whether it's even miniature war games, cut out a bunch of your extra options. Just start with your basics. Just do your basic stuff, and maybe you just set aside some of your abilities for a little bit, just so you can get used to the core mechanics of it. If that helps you. So,
Right.
because sometimes it gets so overwhelming remembering what everybody does or what every ability is or how it interacts. Maybe you just say, okay, today we're just going to go our basic skills and our sword attack, and that's it, and not worry about anything else or whatever. So that's not a bad way to start out a campaign either,
Yep.
if you're doing it for the first time.
One thing I would say is if your players spend a lot of time making sure that they have a cool background, use it.
Yes, absolutely. It'll help you as a DM most likely come up with stories and sessions, and it will help the players stay engaged as well and keep them excited. And there is nothing worse than having a character with a bunch of background and this really cool story when the DM doesn't do anything with it. Now, sometimes they just forget because they're paying attention, they're trying to pay attention to DMing and they kind of get lost in the session or whatever. But when it happens over and over again, they don't do anything with the background. That usually can kind of make a player a little like, oh, this is not what I was hoping. But
Yeah.
going back, that's where it's good to check in with your players too, because they can remind you of a lot of those backgrounds. Like, hey, how'd the session go? Well, you haven't brought up my long lost brother yet. You're like, oh, yeah, okay, got it. And you know that you can add that in the near future. Oh, that leads us to another tip. Don't force things. So I would say if you forget about the long lost brother, don't make it in the very next episode. You don't have to. If it fits, it fits, but you don't have to worry about forcing things. I would let things go more naturally than forcing. So, yeah.
Yeah. Actually, this is gonna sound a little weird. If you really want to do like a bigger module, you might want to break out like things in like certain steps and kind of like divide it out a little bit. So I used the first time I tried like writing like a module, I used like the military planning idea. So it's Sergeant Major eats sugar cookies is what the acronym spells out to you. So it was like the situation, what the mission is, the enemy, their activity, support, and then like the command or whatever. So you can kind of skip the couple of last things. But the thing is like, hey, what the situation is, what you want the player's goals to be, or like when they're running into it. And then the last thing is like the enemy, like, right? Like, what is the enemy doing? The other thing is like when you're going through, like, okay, we're going to get through, we're going to do things. So there are decision points. What happens if the players do X? Then what we would normally expect them to do, and what is the worst thing that they can do, right? Normally in military terms, it means what's the most aggressive tactic that they can use against you and actually do something against you. You also might want to look at the quite the opposite in D&D. Like, what if they just decide to bug out, not actually help, right? Or do what you expect.
Yes.
And so you go through like you kind of go through like all of those decision points, and it really helps you plan out like a module.
Hmm.
Now, I would do this for every session. The reason being because it can be time consuming writing down like a response to them, like just fireballing everything, including the townspeople.
Yeah.
to get the bad guy. You know, like you maybe
Hmm.
don't need to do that unless your party starts doing that on a regular basis, you know, like, but like when you're just writing it out a module for other people maybe to try out or use or whatever, like that is a good idea because what happens in that scenario?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. And talking about planning, like over planning and not planning a lot, I do typically still, at least, even when I don't plan a lot, I do think of what's the worst case scenario and what happens if they bug out. Because feels like 95% of the time they're either going to do the thing that you totally didn't want them to do, or they're going to avoid or miss completely what you were like trying to get them to do. You have
yeah,
to you have to adjust
yeah,
on the fly, adjust on the fly.
yeah.
Oh, but you have to be very prepared if they do the super bad thing that you did not want them to do.
The other thing is make sure you're setting adventure hooks properly. A lot of times they'll do what you want them to do as long as you got those venture hooks in. Oh, this is about your long lost brother. Cool. Hook. And then like, oh, you got a thing about like trying to find this totem. They also have information on that hook. So now like two of your players are wanting to get information out of these people instead of maybe just going in and nuking them.
Yeah, but I will still say, no matter how many adventure hooks you can throw at a group, sometimes they will not catch any of them at all. Even if you keep spoon feeding them, like, here's a clue where your brother is. Here's a clue where your long lost brother is. Like, why are you not? Here's a neon sign. Here's a neon sign pointing.
Yep.
Here's a
One,
scroll that says your long lost brother is here, and they will not read the scroll. They'll go cool, and they put it in their pocket. You're like, no, read the scroll. Read the scroll. Yeah, I'll read it later. They get
yeah.
cold and they start a campfire and they use that because they they just forget to read it first. It
Oh man.
happens. It happens.
One time the players were like just straight up just like I'm like, hey, here's this library book about this thing that you're researching. Oh, here's the name of the last person to check it out. Do they look into who that person is to see if they know anything else?
Of
What they
course
found
not.
out? No.
You
You know,
might have
I
some players that are just super stubborn, like Hudson, and you ask them to do one thing and they will not do it. You cannot tell Hudson to do
lists.
anything.
Yeah.
Anything. Even if it's for his character. He will say, nope, not gonna do it.
I have my own ideas sometimes.
You do. You do.
I would say I would 100% go against whatever the suggestion is 100% of the time. Maybe 95.
See, there's that 95. Here's something. Give players memories or moments. And what I mean by that is make sure that when you're playing, make sure you give them stuff. Okay. Maybe I should say reward them, things like that. So even if you're running a gritty campaign and everything's really tough, you still got to make sure you have rewards here and there. Otherwise, they could potentially get frustrated or things like that. But
Yeah.
simple little things, whether it is a treasure drop of some sort, even if it's tiny, a gold drop, or part of their story, just a little tidbit of knowledge on their story, something like that. And it goes a long way. So try to find the balance of like, okay, things are getting really hard, getting really hard. Okay, now I give them a little thing, and then they're getting harder, 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 and then we dip down and we give them a little thing. Maybe I should have went the other way. But yeah, little tidbits here and there goes a
Yep.
very long way.
Yeah.
Very long
Uh,
way.
in the campaign that I'm playing, not running, one of the players was getting frustrated and they were just like, I need a moment. I need a big moment where I do the cool thing. And so the DM kind of had to kind of plan that, kind of force it in there,
I gotcha.
let it happen.
Yeah.
And it was
Uh,
cool, by the way.
Oh, nice.
They saved everybody. So it was cool.
Oh, nice. As a DM, be aware of your players. Again, I would imagine they're your friends, so you could talk to them outside of the game, this and that. But at the table, while you're playing, if you see all your friends are getting on their phones a lot, now maybe your generation gets on the phone a lot anyways, but if I see my old friends getting on their phones a lot, that is a little indicator that they are bored. So I have to try to figure out how to make adjustments. I mean, I think
Yep.
it's kind of rude to do that anyway, so they shouldn't be doing that. But it is just little
Yeah.
indicators like that. Or if they're constantly like not paying attention, like, what? Huh? Huh? It might not be you as a
Might
DM.
not be you.
Yeah, totally
There
might
are
not be you. But just
there's
keep that in mind that like,
yeah.
boy, for the last 3 weeks, most of my players are spacing off. That's a little
Yeah.
that's a pattern that maybe you're doing something that maybe we need to bump it up a little bit.
Yeah. Some no, like sometimes like they're like, hey, I'm here. When do we do combat? And then like, oh, we're investigating in a town. Nose goes into the phone. Like that's
Yeah.
just how they play.
Yeah.
You're really, unless something weird happens, you're probably not going to get a lot of their attention, especially undivided. That being said, you'll see them come super alive during combat. So just give them that combat and watch them like pop out and do all sorts of crazy stuff. And like they'll be doing all sorts of weird combat tricks you didn't even think existed.
Yeah. And then you might actually get the opposite of that too. The people that really like the role playing part and they get into the combat and they start to check out a little bit.
Yep.
Just find the balance. Again, talking to the players too. Sometimes it can be hard to talk to the players, be like, hey, I notice you're kind of checking out on me, or it seems like you're checking out when we're doing X, Y, or Z. What do you think? And just let them talk to you. It feels like it's really hard to maybe bring that up to somebody, but I guarantee you, most of the time, I would imagine your friend's gonna just be honest with you, and it'll be totally fine.
Yep.
Because flow is everything for a role playing game, in my opinion. So make sure the game's going in a nice flow. Try not to stop a lot for certain things. And if you don't totally know the answer to something, just make it up on the fly. Again, we'll make mistakes, no biggie. If you have a player that's die hard on figuring out exactly what X does, that's fine. Just,
Let them do it.
yeah, just let them do it and figure it out. That's totally fine. If your table is trying to figure out if something works one way or the other and everybody's kind of at odds, then just flip a coin. Say, okay, heads it's yes, tails it's no, and then we'll move on. And then
Yep.
again, you can look it all up and figure it out later. So
Yep.
flow and fun are the words that stand out to me for a role playing game. Flow and
I got
fun.
one thing that neither of us talked about, and you got to be careful with taking player agency away from them. And it comes up, right? Like you, like in D&D, for example, the players can charm the NPCs, but the reverse is true. The NPCs can charm the players. You gotta be a little careful on that one though, especially on new players. Nothing makes a player more angry than taking away player agency, right? Like that is a
Yeah.
quick way to,
Yeah.
and then also be careful about arresting your players because boy, you want to get wild reactions. Try arresting your players. Just
You do have to be careful about splitting up your party, which kind of goes along with what you're saying a bit. Totally depends on your group and how well you know each other and what they're comfortable at or what they're cool with. But
mhm.
it's sometimes really fun to split the party up. But when people drive 40 minutes to your house, maybe for that Wednesday, and they have to sit out for an hour or two, that could discourage them pretty quick. So you just gotta be careful on that,
Yeah,
is all.
I would say you'd want to do maybe 20 minutes with one group and then check back in with the other group.
Yeah,
And if they don't have anything, you're fine to go back to the other group. But like you might want to be like, well, they're not actually doing anything. We need to get this wrapped up a little bit quicker.
yeah, true. Bouncing between the two split up groups instead of doing one group's thing all the way through, bounce between the two. That's a good tip. That is a good tip.
Yeah.
Because movies and TV shows will do that. They'll bounce between,
Yeah.
two groups,
And
stuff like that.
if it's a bad idea for the players to split up, don't be afraid to penalize them for it. But if it's kind of a scenario where it really wouldn't, like if you were like, well, these people are do this all the time, like in the surrounding areas, don't be afraid to let them do it. Like you're in a town, right? The one guy wants to go to the postal shop, and the other guy wants to go to the church. Listen, they don't need to stay together.
Yeah,
If they can't come to terms, just let one go do one and the other go do the other. It's not that big
yeah.
a deal.
And sometimes players will just split up because of it's what their player would choose. I know one time in a campaign, our group found a dungeon and everybody went to go in, and my guy was like, I have to watch the horses and watch camp. And I cut myself out of the dungeon. And as it just went along that night, I was like, oh, kind of wish I wouldn't have done that, but I just did what the character would do.
Yeah.
But so I just sat there and kind of listened to them dive into the dungeon and go through it. So, but I don't know. You
Yep.
got to realize as a DM, the players are gonna choose things too, and they're responsible for a lot of the fun as well. So if a player's gonna sit there and be quiet and not ever do anything and complain, well, that's not the DM's fault, you know. Or if the player's gonna never really add to anything, or again, just sit back and grumble, well, they have a responsibility to add to the story too. So hopefully, not all the pressure is on you to DM. And hey, another DM tip. If you find that you don't really like DMing, see if somebody else will DM, which can be hard because maybe nobody wants to, but I love it. It's like my favorite thing. But
Don't be the person that's like, oh, the only reason I'm DMing is because nobody else will. And it's just becoming more and more bitter about DMing. Just be like, if you're being the nice person, but like maybe you need to take a break. Like, hey, can somebody else run for the next three?
yeah,
Even if it's just for a couple months, like,
you just reminded me of this. I never used to do this growing up, but as an adult, I find that we're doing this a decent amount. And part of it's because when I play, we're always doing like the podcast. So we're recording it for that, which changes things drastically. But don't be afraid to just do one shots instead of a campaign. So if you just say, hey, why don't we just play this game this one night? I'll make characters or you guys make characters. We'll have fun. We'll see how it goes. And then if it goes into a second session, you play the next week and bam, you're done. Then you could switch on to something else. Or maybe as a DM, you say, well, I want to run this, but maybe like 3 or 4 sessions, a little mini campaign, boom. Those are super fun. Those can be super fun. And one shots to me are actually pretty darn fun. So it's always an option. It
yep,
doesn't always have to be this big, long, epic campaign. Again, just talk to your players. And then as the DM, make sure you do what you want to do. So if you don't want to run a 3-year campaign, then do not do it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. But if you do want to do a 3-year campaign, talk to your players and make sure they want to do it too.
Or be will if they decide to bow out, don't get upset with them because
Yeah.
things come up.
Yeah. Always have to adjust as a DM. Always have to adjust. So
So
whether it's good or bad, I guess, of what comes up.
yeah,
Well, with that being said, we thank you for listening, and we hope that when you are DMing, that you take some of these tips into account. Do not stress when you're DMing. And if you are new to DMing, again, try not to stress. It seems very overwhelming at first, but your players should be very cool with you just kind of going with what you're comfortable with. And just give it a go, have fun, and I guarantee you the results are going to be a lot better than you think they will be. So,
yeah, yeah. A lot of people are just happy to have it, somebody DMs so they don't have to. So,
yeah. Yep, yep. Well, hey, thank you. Like and subscribe, and we will talk to you later.
yep.
Have a
Have a
good
good night.
have a good one.